to spend some time with us. I want to introduce Lindsay Crouse, senior editor of the New York Times, recent new mom. It's maternity leave now, to our good fortune she's able to come join us. And Lindsay has played a role, produced some 350 documentaries, quite a few, and has won like 4 Emmys.
Yeah, 4 Emmys.
Academy Award.
Yep, just last, what was that, April, March?
Yeah. 4 Academy Award nominations, 2 Peabody Awards.
Yes.
Yes, okay, so she's had a lot of success in this role. And Lindsay was with us, actually, I think it was the first year of the festival, or second year, one of the first year of the festival.
Yeah, it was great.
And so we saw actually an unexpected film. A film that was supposed to have gone on Telluride ended up here, about refugees coming across the Mediterranean.
Yeah, that was one of our Oscar nominees, actually. It went on to become one. It was called 4.1 Miles, and it was in the heat of the refugee crisis about a Greek lifeguard that was, or Coast Guard captain that was charged with kind of saving people that were literally falling into the ocean.
It was terrific. It was a really powerful piece of filmmaking. So this notion of the leading print media source in the United States, at least in terms of what we talked about earlier, sort of the national newspaper, in many ways, the New York Times, playing an increasing role in producing visual media. It's quite interesting. And so, what is some of the thinking, do you think, behind that for the Times to be increasingly branching out into this area?
Sure. Well, I mean, at the Times, we've evolved so much. I mean, and first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here again. And it's really exciting to showcase some of the work that we've done recently, because for me, I think it's really building on a lot of the work that I've done, just even in, well, I've been at the Times for a decade now, for just over a decade, and even in that small amount of time, it has changed so much. But I think, at the Times, it's really about just getting the most, whatever the messages of the day out in whatever medium people are consuming it in. And so increasingly that is, well, obviously it's online, but also it's in video form. And that's why I think short video in particular and short film has been something that we've been so excited and so lucky to get into, and even more grateful to be successful in it. To tell stories in ways that get beyond just the print word, the text, the print on the page, and kind of show people the story, help them to experience it, help them to meet the person with the opinion and actually see the emotion on their face. And so in a lot of the videos today, which that we're going to show, which did break news, I think part of why they were able to break through and kind of have the impact that they had was because people could actually watch the protagonist tell their story, and we as producers could match their story with, with B-roll, with video that showed the backstory, the context, but was the person really explaining their story and their opinion, their point of view, that was able to break through. And at the Times, that's what we've always cared about most is impact and really having a change on whatever issue we're helping someone make commentary on.
And so the videos we're going to see today are part of what's called the opinion selection of videos, which is different than op docs. Maybe just explain briefly what that difference is. And your primary involvement now is with the opinion videos. In addition, you also write opinion pieces as a writer on the opinion page. So that's where you are. So maybe just explain briefly op docs and what's different about that, which was, I think, a primary part of your responsibility last time you were here.
Sure, absolutely. So when I came to the Times, and I think that was 2011, we had an opinion just kind of expanded to video, into film, into presenting that as part of the opinion report. And so OpDocs started in 2011 as an opportunity for independent filmmakers to share their point of view, whether it was their own thoughts and feelings and perspectives, or the thoughts and perspectives and opinions of a protagonist that they filmed. And so they could do that either as an adaptation related to a feature film, or they could do it as an originally produced, directed, conceived short film. And we would premiere that on our website and release it. It would have its global premiere on NewYorkTimes.com, and we would put it forth to the world, and it would live there in perpetuity, and just alongside any of our op-eds or opinion essays. And since then, a lot of the awards that you mentioned at the beginning for the series, that was all for OpDocs, because it's very festival-oriented. But in the years since, we decided to expand OpDocs and kind of expand video on the New York Times and on New York Times Opinion into, I guess we're calling it opinion video, and so that's run by my colleague Adam Ellick, and and it's basically videos that we produce, that we make, that we report. And so that's a lot of what I'm going to show you today is videos that I produced and reported. And again, the sole goal there for the series is impact, to break news and whenever possible, but also to comment on news and really to change news and to really help readers experience issues and to ideally change their minds.
So to put an issue out through opinion that is intended to have some impact to change the situation that may be very closely related to this opinion.
Yeah, and once again, to do what words alone, especially text words, cannot do, to really pair words and arguments with beautiful visuals that we produce and that really help reinforce each other to really challenge our viewers and our audience to engage with an issue in a new way.
Well, that may be a good setup for the first piece, so why don't we show it and then come back and talk some more. We're planning to show each piece and then have some conversation and show the next piece. We have a total of 6 pieces there. Basically between 4 and 7 minutes long, each of them. Maybe you could start by explaining how this piece came into existence.
Sure. So it's crazy, I haven't watched this since I had my own daughter, and kind of emotional and kind of just really exciting to watch it in a totally different context. But anyway, so I'm a competitive runner, and I've been an athlete since high school, college, always kind of, and I grew up watching Nike ads and reading Nike ads and just really kind of believing every inspirational message that these companies are selling us, because we want to dream crazy, and that is that really motivates us and drives us. But then I came to the Times, and I realized I was I was still a really competitive athlete. I was getting better as an athlete, which was amazing to me. And I realized I was kind of one of the only female athletes at that company, and they weren't really reporting on coverage that I was reading myself on sports. And so I raised my hand and I started reporting on distance running and track running, and it was really, really fun and fascinating, and also really rewarding to get to tell stories that I would read. And so a lot of my friends were becoming mothers and having kids, and I was watching them kind of come back and continue to be amazing athletes. And then I realized that other Olympians were doing the same thing, other female Olympians, like having children and coming back. And so I started writing about that. And it was in this very kind of enthusiastic look at what they can do. Like, having a baby is already so hard, but isn't it amazing how incredible, like, isn't it amazing that they can still just be such incredible athletes afterwards? And they would tell me, like, yeah, it's incredible, but sometimes off the record they'd be like, but by the way, our sponsors, and a lot of them were sponsored by Nike or other major shoe companies, like, we are doing this amazing thing, but we're not being supported by our sponsors. And in many cases, we are taking major pay cuts to do this, but we have no choice, because at the end of the day, what else are they going to do? Athletes don't have rights. I mean, in America, women don't have rights when they have children. Why would Olympians be any different? Unless their sponsors decided to change something. But at the same time, as you saw in this video, anything about their contracts were covered by really powerful NDAs. And if you look at sort of Nike versus an ordinary Olympian. It feels ridiculous to put those words together, but they're not as famous, especially female athletes, as the company itself. It's sort of a David and Goliath situation. What woman, especially when she has a baby, and is discovering all of these penalties kind of in real time, is going to be able to fight her sponsor, especially when there are legal penalties potentially involved. So all of this, I'm kind of hearing, and I'm writing these rah-rah stories. I sometimes would even slip little asides about this into the stories, but no one noticed and no one seemed to care. So I just kind of, filed it away and was like, okay, let's move on. Let's keep writing these stories. Let's keep reporting. And just even putting female athletes in the Times was sort of, to me, felt like a victory enough because, media exposure is power, etc. And then Nike started to do these Dream Crazy campaigns, and I noticed that they were also kind of including pregnancy in that in terms of like the crazy dreams, and I was like, okay, this can't still be true. They can't still be praising women publicly for doing these amazing things, especially around pregnancy, and privately penalizing them. So I reached out to Alicia, who was no longer competing, but was kind of aimed to be a spokesperson for this issue, and some other athletes as well, and really kind of reported around and ultimately realized like this did still seem to be true. I mean, it's really hard to prove a negative, but was able to do that by seeing some contracts. And so ultimately cast Alicia in this video where we actually almost hijacked the emotional vocabulary of one of those Nike ads, and produced it just like a Nike ad, but with the reporting in there. And then we released it on Mother's Day, which really had the impact that we were looking for. Again, when I said before, like impact is what we're going for. It was almost like what are all the different ingredients that we could take to get as many people's eyes on this video as possible. And it worked. By the end of it, we had Democrats sending, Democratic representatives sending Nike letters saying, we saw this video that the Times ran. This does not seem to be in line with Nike's vision, with Nike's mission. It was like, yes, it is actually totally in line with Nike's mission, which is to make money, and it's your job as representatives to change the laws that permit this. And then we had Ivanka Trump tweeting that she'd seen Alicia run when she was the pregnant runner and was totally in awe of her, but had no idea of the silent struggle that she was going through. And it was like, well, Ivanka, you're also in a position to change these kinds of things, like please do. But it was really amazing to see bipartisan support for from others who were struggling, and sort of if these Olympians are dealing with this, what must everyone else be dealing with? And it started a really powerful conversation, so we were thrilled.
Great. Yeah, and I'm sure Ivanka has her own silent struggles. I thought the emotional impact was really quite powerful. And what you're saying is that was part of the goal, to create visual imagery, pacing, rhythm, music, light. It all seems to come together. It's a polished piece of media.
Yep, yeah, I'd say this is one of the more highly produced, we call it enterprise at the Times. It took me probably a year and a half to report, probably half a year to, I was producing op docs at the same time, so it's not like this was the only thing I was doing. But it was really hard to source, really hard to get people to talk about it, especially with the contractual elements. So once we did have the reporting in place, then it was, how do we turn this into the kind of video that's going to have, that's going to elevate the reporting, again, beyond what a written piece could do. And so we did accompany it with the written work where we showed all our sourcing, et cetera, but we wanted the video, we wanted it to be something that you couldn't turn away from.
And how do you work with the director in this case? It was your idea to take on the subject matter. There's not a writing credit per se. Who created the script, and what role did the director play?
Sure. Well, I wrote the script. With a team. I wrote it all, and then we almost had like a writer's room where we elevated it the same way I imagine. I've never worked in advertising, but the same way I imagine that would work. we hired a director who's almost the creative director, Max Cantor, a really talented filmmaker, to create the video itself and do the artistic directing. So it was really almost like, you know, we have this reporting. What can we do to elevate this reporting to make it, you know, seen by as many different people as possible? And so that was Max's job, to kind of envision the video side of it.
Do you have any idea how many views there were?
Not right now. I mean, it must be billions, but across all the different platforms that we ran it. But I should have looked that up before I came, because also that's something with the Times, there's one set of views that we don't disclose, and then there's the YouTube videos as well.
Sure. And the impact? Could you measure specific impact?
Sure. Well, in the video that we're going to see next, between this video and that video, Nike changed its policy in a way that when I went to a lot of athletes to try to get them to do this, the response that they gave me was, there's no point in doing it, they'll never change. And they were right to think that. I mean, it's a company run by men from the top down to the athlete, the actual people engaging with the athletes. And pregnancy was not something that was supported in this company, and women had no voice. If you were doing it, it was almost like, keep your head down, come back as quickly as possible, do not advocate for yourself, you have no rights. And I think that's actually why it resonated so much with women in the workplace, is that, I mean, hopefully for a lot of American women, especially privileged American women, you do get maternity benefits at this point, but I think a lot of women still feel a lot of pressure to come back as soon as possible. Why wouldn't you? You're gone for a little bit. Oftentimes in the workplace, you're only as good as your last performance, and that's certainly true in an athletic context, where, especially if you're having a child later in your career, people are going to kind of write you off. So you're going to try to come back soon, and you're certainly not going to. You're just going to kind of take the medals and run, you know.
So let's watch the next piece, where you take on, again, pregnancy issue, but from some different angles, which I think is sort of interesting.
Sure.
Okay, so this followed the first the first opinion piece, by how much time, and Nike had made some initial announcements about changing policy, but they had not been specific. Is that part of what was going on here?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, well, the real backstory here is that when I was reporting out the story generally, almost like the headline, Nike penalizes female athletes for pregnancy. All the athletes that I had as sources had already left Nike, and so, as I said before, it's really hard to prove a negative, especially if you don't have someone who's kind of actively dealing with this at the time. And then I saw that Allison Felix had a baby, the most decorated, or one of the most decorated track and field athletes of all time. And I was like, okay, well, that kills my whole story. If Allison Felix had just had a baby, I'm sure she's getting what she wants. And this was in December, before we released this film, ultimately in May. And so I reached out to Allison's brother, who's her agent, and I just said, look, I'm doing a story on Nike and maternity protections. Just wanted to kind of get a sense of what your experience with this is. Again, just thinking it was killing my story and that I would have to move on. And actually that would be a great thing, because it would mean that my story wasn't true, at least for some athletes. And actually he reached out and said, yeah, this is terrible, she's really struggling, let's talk. And so he and she, by proxy, were my off-the-record sources throughout this whole process. And without them, it never would have happened. But she was going to, understandably, I mean, she just had a child, was in active negotiations with her sponsor at the time, was going to stay off the record, just out of protection for her. And when we did release this, and the reaction was bold, but in particular because Nike was saying it was going to change its policies, but wasn't giving specifics, and this is what the athletes who worked with me, both in text and also in video, so Kara Goucher, for example, etc., they were all very clear that when Nike responded to the first video that we put out, the Alicia Montano video, and said, we do offer protections, they were like, no, we need specifics. And so when Allison went public with her story, and so much of the athletic and world generally really freaked out about it. I mean, I'm sure you saw the story as she was competing in the Olympics this go around. This has become a big part of her legacy as an athlete. They were all saying, like, we must have specifics. And so finally, I want to say a few months later, I think in August of 2019, Nike actually did release new contracts, and they did have maternity protections in it. And so that was what Allison and Alicia and Kara and all the athletes that spoke to me both on and off the record, that's what they all really fought for. So, yeah, it was just a thrilling example of change and impact really happening.
And so you feel the second video sort of pushed that impact to finally get that codification?
Yeah, absolutely. If the first video were almost like Hiroshima, where the company's like, wait, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, Allison was absolutely Nagasaki and game over.
What's interesting in that, there's a piece in today's New York Times about how economists in particular have underestimated the impact of climate change. And what if we were to be watching a short video produced in this manner, it would have a lot more impact, I'm sure.
I think about that constantly and about how to, so the challenge is with producing any video like this, you need a face, you need a protagonist, you need someone who is dealing with the story, and ideally who is revealing information about, a secret struggle that they've had. With climate change, this is really, really difficult to do. I mean, also with any reporting, this is difficult to do. So as I said before, doing this project took me, really it took me a career in some ways, right? Because you do the first reporting years ago, maybe like 7 years ago for me, and then you just kind of keep doing it and doing it. So this stuff takes a really long time. I think with climate change, we'll get there. I mean, definitely people understand how, in the news media world, just how important this story is. I mean, I think it's the most important story right now in terms of what we really can't be talking about it enough, but it's hard to talk about it in a new way. People also say this about women athletes, that it's all the same, that, that there are similar critiques about why it isn't covered. So that's a reporting challenge, it's a creative challenge. How do you do this in a different way? And so I think with climate change, that is any reporter's game right now.
Well, the power here is that the story is so personal, and it is about a protagonist wanting to achieve something, to break through, and to end up in a different position. And that is very powerful by itself, and it conforms to the rules of narrative drama as well. We had a film here last year called The Ant and the Grasshopper, which is where filmmakers in Malawi, covering a small little, very poor, drought-stricken village, encounter this very dynamic woman who at one point says, I wish I could go to America and talk to American farmers about the impact of climate change. And they bring her here, and she goes and meets 8 or 10 American farmers whose reactions are quite across the board. They're not the same thing at all. And I think that that's an example of this, because it makes the issue more personal, more immediate, and of course the movie is not being seen by as many people as are watching this, but I felt that it had a lot of impact, so I think it sort of underscores that point. And it sort of raises for me the other question, because we look at the nightly news, and there's 24-hour-a-day news all over the place, which to me is sort of repetitive and rhetorical and just not ever breaking through and going anywhere. And just the notion of a piece, an opinion piece, why not? Having a platform on cable or mainstream news that actually would have this kind of fresh impact. But it's a missed opportunity, I think.
Yeah, and I think also, as I was saying, this just takes so long to do. You need to give it the platform when you finally release it, so that it's not up against the daily stream of think pieces and takes, and you really need to kind of separate the big news from sort of this cacophony that I think so much of us can get caught up in at this point, that almost distracts from another glacier melting in Antarctica, right? This should be the kind of stuff that we're talking about constantly, and I think that's a real challenge.
Okay, let's watch the next one. We're going to be, all these films today have to do with women in sports one way or another, but also taking off into other areas. So let's take the next one. So this is the film that got you a job offer at Nike, I'll bet. So again, a very strong emotional impact. piece of media. What was the impact? What happened?
Well, this was another example of a film where, well, it was kind of showing how America loves babies, loves girls, loves children, but when those little girls grow up, it often, this country doesn't always treat them the way that, that we would want these little girls to the opportunities that we would want them to have. And so with Mary, she was the bestest girl in America. She was in so many headlines. She was famous in a lot of ways. She was almost like a child star. And just as in Hollywood with child actresses, it can be a really difficult situation, but we rarely hear from these girls when they become women about what happened to them. And so in Mary's case, it was a scenario, as you saw here, that parallels what happens with so many girls who become women, where they get pressured to become thin, they're told that it's to help their performance, and instead it's really hurting them. And oftentimes those stories just disappear. And so when Mary shared her story, it was like people went bananas. I was astonished. When I was kind of telling my colleagues about her story, they were like, okay, sure, let's do it. But I don't think people, my colleagues not being athletes themselves and not maybe distance runners, they didn't know who she was, but it made a huge splash in the running world, the distance running world, but then also with anyone who'd ever been kind of like a younger girl, younger woman who'd been pressured to lose weight, to become thinner. And to hear Mary kind of say, look, I'm so talented, but look at what this did to me, and look what this did to my body, and look what it did to my mental health and to my performance. This is bad for us, and this is what must change. I think it's been viewed almost 20 million times now or something. I was just looking at it the other day to check to prepare for this. So many times. It's being screened in for young athletes and in a lot of sports programs, and has really just become a lot of, she's almost become a spokesperson for ending this kind of practice among girls.
We showed a film last night called The Automat and talked a little bit about how history is linked to culture, and to not consider that in its whole totality is to miss what it is. And I think that these pieces also have very strong cultural resonance. They're not just about what we're seeing. They're about who we are and what's going on. And I think that, but as you say, it reverberates beyond the specifics of athletics to just how girls are raised, and how vulnerable they are in this situation, being surrounded as they are by these competitive, sort of single-minded coaches. I'm surprised that these coaches also didn't see the deterioration.
Well, I think that's the thing, and that's sort of an undertone of a lot of the work that I've done, is that if you put more women both in the storytelling seat and also in the decision-making seat in terms of coaching, etc. At least, it's not to say that women are saints and women do everything the right way, but at least they'll connect a little bit more to, in addition to parity, obviously, which is important, at least they'll understand a little bit more what might be going on. No coach wants to lose. No person is, well, few people are intentionally sadistic. It's often these problems are coming from a place of ignorance, which is why we were really careful in this video to make sure that Mary was also giving prescriptions about what should change. Not to just say this is the problem, but to say, look, first of all, here's what you should know, here's what you should learn, and then also here's how we can solve this, not only at Nike, but in this country and in this culture. And so you're right. Part of my challenge as a journalist and a storyteller, especially in women's sports and with female athletes, is that a lot of people just, and especially in journalism, especially when I was doing this work, I think this work helped change this narrative a little bit. People would say, oh, it's just female athletes, it's not that interesting. And so my challenge was to say, no, this is so interesting. These are stories that everyone wants to hear. To not just say to not just assume that there's an obvious audience, because there wasn't, but to try to get everyone to watch it and to chat about it.
Absolutely. Let's watch the next one. We have two more, and then I can have a larger discussion. Is there any controversy around this one?
Yeah, this is a really difficult one to do generally, because Andy approached me and she said, I have a moderate view. And I was like, okay, that's exactly the view that nobody is going to like on this issue. And as actually, it did break through, and a lot of people did like it. But the people that feel most strongly about this issue are people that are, they have really strong beliefs. And she's saying, let's wait for science. The science isn't totally there. I don't know. But ultimately, we decided to do it because we wanted people to, first of all, to empathize with someone who is living this issue day to day, and really, really navigating it in large part on their own. And then we wanted people to talk about it and to hear a moderate view and to engage with a moderate view that, again, is extremely polarizing.
And so, what was the genesis of this piece?
Andy reached out to me and she said, look, I'm a trans runner. She knew I was a runner, and she said, I don't know what to do with this story, and I just want to, with my experience, but I do want to present a moderate view of my story, and I'm curious if you think that there's a place for that here, that people might engage with someone who's in the middle of this issue, that has direct personal stakes in the issue, but also is generally trying to make decisions based on a science that isn't fully there yet.
I mean, for a lot of people, I think that would see this piece, it may be the first, most in-depth exposure they will have had to a trans woman, period.
Yep, and that's another reason why we ran it, is a lot of people have thoughts on transgender issues at this point and have never met a transgender person, and that's fine. But we wanted people to meet Andy and to kind of get to know her and hear her point of view.
Remember when Bill Clinton, the first thing he did in his administration was to remove the ban on gay and lesbian service people in the military. And he got beaten up for it and ultimately lost and started Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was a mixed success, I think, at best. I wondered at some point, why doesn't he bring a naval military officer who is lesbian or gay onto television exposure and have a conversation and just demystify this issue and begin the conversations based on reality instead of stereotyping?
Yeah, and I think, again, that's what we weren't, Andy's not in a position, as she says, to settle this issue, but we did want people to meet her and kind of hear hear what her concerns are about this, again, national debate at this point.
And it couldn't be communicated on print journalism in the same way.
We could have, well, the thing with gender issues generally is that seeing someone is such a big part of it, and so you had to see her, you had to hear her, and also see her running, because we're talking about sports here, and with sports there is so much of a visual language to it all that it really lent itself well to video.
And this piece is art directed.
Yes, very well art directed by my colleague Taja Jensen, who, again, just as you saw in the other videos, the pundits playing out on the video, on the buildings that she runs at dawn, that was all his vision, and added another level of beauty to it.
Very effective, absolutely. One more piece, and then we'll have a larger discussion from the audience. The New York Times is giving you a lot of latitude. And you were discussing a little bit earlier that there's a bit of an attitude there that if you're really excited about this, you've got real passion for it, go for it, and not really holding you on a tight leash.
Yeah, I think one nice thing about the opinion section generally is we're pretty open to experimentation, and I think video is a really exciting place to do that in, because you can not only experiment with argument and how you tell your story, but also the visuals. There's just so much opportunity there for creativity and, again, to use those visuals to buttress and reinforce and sometimes advance an argument.
Yeah. And also, I think the humor in both the last two pieces, just in particular, Memo, which again also demystifies, an undocumented person doing what they do, living their life.
Yeah, I think one common thread to the films with other protagonists is kind of taking the viewer behind the scenes. And again, that's another really exciting thing that video can bring to it, is that you can be using the words to explain something while visually seeing the backstory. And in the case of Memo, you're getting to know an undocumented immigrant who came here illegally, says it himself, became a citizen ultimately, but is one of the fastest distance runners in the country and in some ways the world, really a superior athlete to almost any of us. But you wouldn't know because he doesn't talk about it. I heard who he was, and we were able to kind of use narration to help him tell his story, and ideally to start a fun conversation with viewers. Yeah.
Constructed piece that is shaped around the reality of the character.
Yeah, our vision for the piece was to almost spoof like Fitspo, if you guys are on Instagram very much. That's sort of very sleek, very stylized fitness video storytelling that a lot of people do themselves. We wanted to take that and put an unexpected person, insert an unexpected person into that.
Is it the first time that you were on screen in the Don't Quit piece?
I'm not sure. It was the first time we did it that way. So yeah, I mean, I guess maybe actually, because yeah, I think it might have been. So it's a little old at this point. I think maybe did it a year ago, and I think I'd used my voice before, but this was the first time on screen.
Right. And you also wrote a piece about how your former boyfriend was now dating Lady Gaga, right?
Yeah, in text.
On text, but that was not done as a video piece.
No.
Yeah. Did you think about it?
I don't know what video we would have done. Yeah.
Okay, well, I have other things I can talk about, but here's a few things from the audience. Yeah, Emma.
I was very inspired by all of these, very impactful. The entire time I was thinking about how important language is, and a lot of the times in our society we don't think about the non-binary language, and we often just gender people as female and male. And when I first watched the first two films, I was going to ask if you had ever worked with any trans athletes, because I know that was a very impactful thing that's happening right now. And I did notice some people leave afterward, but I continually thinking about gender, like in every conversation, and how people are often assuming other people's gender without realizing that there are non-binary people who use they, them pronouns. But that being said, I think there is a lot of homophobia and transphobia. So with the kind of work that you do, it's really important for us to see these stories too, and to start understanding that these people are people, and that it's just the way that it is. So I just wanted to ask, when you're making these, do you think about kind of how language changes with gender and kind of trans stories, and how people are impacted who aren't used to that language and aren't used to hearing these stories?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great question, so thank you. With regard to pronouns, we use whatever pronouns the person wants to use, so that sort of solves itself, and that we're just very open to anything, and the Times uses they and them whenever the person wants that. With regard to gender issues broadly and transgender issues, for me, the priority is just highlighting the individuals who have stories that they want to tell and their perspectives themselves. And that's a really wonderful thing about being an opinion, is that I don't have to do it for the person. I'm able to kind of pass the mic and let them tell their story on their own, and ideally lend some of the, help connect them with the creative minds of the Times who can help elevate what they want to say in their arguments. And so in those cases when I'm producing it, I'm almost like a polisher and kind of helping connect them to the Times' audience, but it's not my own point of view, which is a real privilege to get to kind of serve in that way.
Yes.
Hi, first of all, I think the films are just wonderful, and the sequences are terrific, and continue the story, so to speak. I have an unusual connection in two different ways to the shorts, and one is that I'm a psychologist, and my doctoral research was on runners and amenorrhea. And so, and what was interesting at the time, and I don't think it's really changed very much, is that I had three groups: normals, women with amenorrhea, and runners with amenorrhea. both the women with amenorrhea who were not athletes and the runners with amenorrhea both had intense, what we call sex role conflict. In other words, the runners were not only developing amenorrhea because of the weight loss, they were under the amount of weight where they could produce adequate hormones to menstruate, but they had the strain, the internal strain. And the strain is really about perfectionism and feeling never good enough, which is actually part of the profile of someone who can become the athlete. It's embedded in that. The second part of what I want to mention is that I have a daughter who was a lead sailor and represented the U.S. In the equivalent of the Junior Olympics. And she was taken to the U.S. Olympic Center where she trained with the Olympians and Navy SEALs came in. Long story short, they all became hypothermic and my daughter was the last one to let herself get out of the water because of the striving. So it's the personality in the person as well as the system of patriarchy that doesn't really understand youth and doesn't understand the differences between male and female and striving and how to manage that. So with that, what I'd like to say is that I thought your films were fabulous, but I think it's the integration of all those different parts, and I was left feeling like, boy, I want to do something, but I don't know where to go with this. And I'm just wondering in the future if you could consider links to say, this is, I don't know if you want to do that in your role, but concern about X, look into Y.
Oh, sure. I mean, and thank you so much for those comments. One really great thing about being able to publish and present on the New York Times, it doesn't work as well in this context, but when you're viewing something online, we are able to present the videos with a text page, and on that text page, we're able to supplement with whether it's our reporting or additional information, and certainly hyperlinks and other links where relevant. So it is something we're able to do.
It's two more.
By contrast to the last question, realizing they were at a film festival, I was most interested in the distinction between the first series and your last presentation, where you, in essence, changed roles. In the majority of them, you were a journalist. But in the final one, you served filmatically as an author, and you were taking a very different position. Why?
Why? Well, it depends on whose point of, the answer is really authorship, and who we think is the right person to kind of tell a story. And so in the point of view, and in video, and especially in the opinion section, we're able to do that in a lot of different ways. So I also do this in text. I'll either interview someone and kind of tell their story, putting my own lens on it, or I'm able to just kind of tell my own story, and then it's obviously my lens. And so it's just kind of being able to be fluid in one way or another. In video, we're able to, for example, with Andy's story, just totally pass the mic, and Andy's a transgender athlete, and let her just tell her story, and I think I polished it a little bit and was maybe the editor on it, I think, at least in terms of argument, helping her with that. But then if I have my own story my own argument that I want to put forth, I'm able to just do that in video, and then I work with a producer for that. But with the last video, it's effectively an op-ed. Or I guess a column, because I also write those, and I was able to work with a video producer, Kirby Ferguson, who set it to visuals.
Yeah, right back here. Yes. Yes. You. Sorry.
Who am I going to? Thank you. This is a follow-up to the previous question. So your first film talked about protection in pregnancy, contractual. So but then we have things like, for women, you have issues like loss of the menstrual period stuff. So can we have that built in? So if they reconstitute the Oregon project with a nutritionist, with a psychologist, what guidelines need to really be followed to, say, have women continue to be healthy and perform at a championship level? I mean, getting much more subtle than just pregnancy, you know. How do we keep them healthy and still do that? What protections can we put in there?
I mean, I think just creating protections in the first place and creating policies that even recognize and prioritize that for a woman, there may be a separate set, you know, that a woman's menstrual cycle is very important to her athletic performance, just recognizing that in the first place, and kind of talking about it, even having a dialogue around that. That's sort of new, particularly in professional circles, but also even on high school teams, to kind of just talk about that in the first place, recognizing that that needs to be a part of a healthy athlete. A healthy athlete is a high-performing athlete, which I don't think has always been recognized to be the case. So even just kind of having that conversation is one step. And then also just making athletes feel comfortable talking about this. I think in the past there has been a lot of secrecy. I mean, Mary spoke about that herself, that she was suffering a lot of times alone, and that in many cases she was encouraged to suffer alone. People didn't want to talk about the challenges. And so I think we also saw this with Simone Biles, with Naomi Osaka, just the dialogue around mental health. Mental health influences physical health, and so just having those conversations as well will promote health in all contexts, and that will in turn promote performance. And I think for women as well as men, that's a conversation that we need to keep having.
Lindsay, you've been very generous, and congratulations on this fabulous work. Next time we'll show the other 246 pieces. Have an all-night marathon.
Absolutely, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.